There is no growth in comfort and no comfort in growth. Yet the big leaps are how careers are made and how businesses excel. So how do you master not knowing at all or feeling like an imposter? How do you have the conversations that will lead to trust and, of course, excellence? How do you take charge of the things that you can control? How do you thrive outside your comfort zone? That's what this podcast is about. I'm your host, Wanda Wallace, and it's time to get out of the comfort zone. Welcome to the conversation. I want to talk today about top teams and about how to get yourself prepared for a career that involves being a part of the top team or influencing the top team. Now, I have to say personally, I have watched a number of people take a great move. Sometimes it's 2 steps ahead of where they are with strong sponsorship, and clearly they have the skills and competence to do the job that they're being asked to do. But I watched the career derail and go off into the sunset, largely because they did not anticipate what it was like to interact with that top team. That's not about interacting with the CEO as much as it is about interacting with peers and learning how to manage the dynamics of that group. In my experience, the top team is a different dynamic, a different team dynamic than anything else that exists in the organization. So what I want to talk to do today is, what do you need to know? How do these top teams work? What's it really like? What does that mean for your career? And how do you get yourself prepared for that as well? So I might argue that our guest today is uniquely qualified for this one, largely because she's been on top teams in a number of industries around the world. So Gina Jardine, both a friend and a great colleague, is a former C-suite executive who's been doing this kind of work for over 30 years in large corporations around a bunch of different industries, as I said, and across different countries. Global experience includes mining and building products and automotive and warehousing and logistics. So you see that there's quite a breadth there. And I will also say that today she does some coaching, but she also does some board work. So she sees that top team from the other side, being a member of the board or non-exec director. If you're in the UK, that language will make sense to you. So Gina, it's a delight to have you to this conversation. I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, Wallace. And Wanda, I'm really excited to be here.
Fantastic. Okay, so I have to start with the top, which is you've been there. What's it really like? Give us a description for what it means to be on the top team. What's the experience?
Yeah, look, it is really like any other team you'll ever be a part of, to be brutally honest. On the surface of it, it looks like similar to any other high-performing team. I mean, whether that's sport or whether that's corporate. I mean, there's camaraderie, there's shared goals, there's collective wins, yada, yada, yada. But for me, the executive team has a really different energy. There's a really different weight. The decisions are bigger for a start, right? The time horizons are longer, the consequences are wider, and then depending on the industry that you're in and the job that you have, the impacts can be life-changing. You know, I remember one of my first exco positions, and I kind of, new girl on the block, if you will, and I walked into the boardroom and I was surrounded by all of these portraits of really well-known former CEOs. And I said to myself, wow, I know I'm not in Kansas anymore, Toto, because just that sheer impact of reality about what you were stepping into and the impact that you might have on other people really hit home.
Yeah, I remember somebody saying on a podcast years ago, talking about being on the top team and talking about, you sit around the top team and realize that we could actually destroy the economy of a country if we're not careful. And it's kind of hard to underestimate the impact that you have with some of the decisions that you're making. So, okay. Clearly, I don't want to name companies, so we're going to stay out of that. And I haven't named any of the companies that you have been a part of for particular reasons. And we have a little bit more candid conversation. But lots of time I find the dynamics among the team members. I mean, there's competition to begin with on that team. So how do you think about the peers that exist with you on the team?
Yeah, I mean, look, when I think about team, I kind of frame it up in kind of my frame of reference is kind of the 4 Ps. And these are really common to any top team. Talk about what's common in teams. And my experience in this is that all top teams vary by culture, but they're really impacted by the same 4 forces. And I call them, as I said, these my 4 Ps. Yeah, and that's the CEO's personality, what the team's purpose is, the politics that sits in the room, and then the power that really sits beneath the surface. And so for me, if you can navigate your way around those 4 Ps, regardless of the sort of industry that you're in or the type of role that you do, you're going to set yourself up really well. And so maybe I can talk a little bit around kind of those 4 Ps. Yeah. Let's start with the CEO. For better or for worse, you can feel it instantly. They set the tone for that top team. A CEO's style, their competence, their confidence, their insecurities, and everyone's got insecurities, their blind spots, their relationship with the chair, it all leaks into a culture of an organisation, and particularly that of the top team. I mean, gosh, I've had the privilege of working for some of the funniest, the kindest, the smartest CEOs around, and they're genuinely inspiring, and that just permeates the entire team. Equally, I've had the privilege and learning experience, shall we say, to work with some of the sharpest, but the toughest, and occasionally the meanest CEOs that are there. And they kept you completely alert, mostly out of self-preservation. But what the CEO brings to the table in their terms, type of personality, is really how it impacts the culture of the team and how you, as an executive, need to navigate that. Some of the funniest ones, they kept us laughing, right? I mean, they'd have us in giggles, but at times you genuinely had no idea where you stood with them. Comedy was really good, but having some clarity around it was better. The tough ones, they could give you crystal clear expectations, but then you felt you were on the wrong end of it at times, and that if you didn't do the right thing, your security pass was going to be deactivated. So I think, those top teams do vary wildly, but that common denominator is the first P, that the CEO's personality.
It's interesting to hear you say that, because that is my experience. We often talk about take the I out of team. And I think in the top team, there is a very powerful I, and it doesn't change. And that's the CEO. The CEO's mission, the CEO's personality, as you say, the CEO's thing they want to achieve as their legacy. I mean, everything they think is kind of driving how that team organizes. I think we miss that.
No, look, absolutely. And one piece of advice that I give people, particularly now as I coach, as they're thinking about stepping up into the next role, is choose your boss wisely. Choose the CEO wisely. We all have choice, right? Don't feel you have to take that role because it's the next step. Try and we'll talk a little bit about this, but really try and understand what drives that CEO, because it's going to have the biggest influence on how you operate in the team, and what that culture of that top team is about.
That makes sense. So it's not just the personality, it's a lot more about how you would interface with that person, how they want to work, and so on. All right, let's talk about the second P, purpose.
Yeah, so look, for me, the next common element is purpose. And this is a big one. And purpose has loads of definitions. But when I talk about purpose of team at the exco level, it's really around what is the reason for being for this team. And purpose, and to be more accurate, the presence of it or the complete absence of it, is really a winning or a losing team. For me, a top team without a clear purpose is a bit like a luxury yacht, right? Super expensive, everybody's looking at it, but it's actually rudderless. It's not going anywhere. So for me, having a clarity of purpose, what is this team here to do, and everybody being aligned around that, is really a common denominator of what would make a successful team or not. If you have a bunch of talented executives without a purpose, you've got a really bunch of expensive people that are not really making an impact. And, I had the privilege of doing some work with Professor Mark Durand, who is a professor at Judge Business School in Cambridge. And he researches leadership, and he wanted to know around this whole purpose point. And his research was amazing, actually. So what he does is he immerses himself in top teams. So he takes himself out of the world of academia, and he pops himself into where top teams operate. And one of the teams, and for our UK listeners, they might know about the great boat race that's over here, where Cambridge races Oxford, and he lived with them for 12 months to understand what top teams were or how top teams operated. But the one I want to talk about, I think, is a really interesting one, and that was when he immersed himself into a team of top surgeons during the Afghanistan war in Camp Bastion. And he literally lived with them. He worked with them, he watched them, he was in the midst of these life and death conditions. And their purpose, Wanda, was really razor sharp, and that was keep people alive who would otherwise die. And so what happened, when these brilliant surgeons had a purpose, all the usual politics, all the hierarchy, all the turf wars were gone. They were completely irrelevant. Because when the stakes were high, purpose cut through everything. So in the middle of that chaos and the noise and the unimaginable stress that they experienced, they operated as an elite team. They trusted each other implicitly. A bit of dark humour kept them sane, but purpose kept them united. But I think the fascinating part of Mark's research was what happened in the quiet moments when that purpose, crisis purpose didn't exist. When it wasn't front and centre. The team actually unravelled. And his research showed that in times when they weren't in crisis, when they weren't laser focused, they became restless, and edgy and even dysfunctional at times. And that was because they didn't have that shared purpose, that urging, anchoring purpose. All those human dynamics came out in them, that status, difference, ego, all bubbled up. And I can say that, corporate teams are not that dissimilar, right? You give a team a crystal clear purpose. And I don't mean the slogan that's laminated and put on the wall in the foyer, but the purpose that it gives people direction, and you will have a top team. And if you know that, and if you're not clear on that as an executive, then invest the time and Dan will find out about it.
It's, if you think about a top team, you have a lot of very bright, expensive, high-powered, high achievers who want to make a difference. That's what they've done their entire careers, and they're there on that team, sacrificing or giving to be a part of that one in order to have a big impact. And if there's nothing to have an impact on, they're going to come. If you just think logically, they're going to come unglued. And that's where we're going to have the worst of competition with each other. The egos, as you said, a whole bunch of stuff is going to start to come out. And people disengage from the team. And you can watch it. You can see it. Because there's I go to these meetings, but what's the point?
100%. If there is a vacuum, people will fill it. And so if you don't have that clarity of purpose where everyone's pulling together, then they're going to pull in separate places. You have the vacuum and they'll fill it, and ego will fill it, and tension will fill it, and politics will fill it, and all sorts of things. So you need to understand what it is.
All right, I want to emphasize something you said, but I want to come back to re-emphasize it. This notion about purpose is not purpose as in mission statement. It's a reason we are together as a team. What are we here as a team to do as a team? That's the kind of core, what decisions are we making? Where are we weighing in on decisions? What problems are we solving together? And that purpose has to be a reason we're together, as opposed to you have your mission to solve and the other person has their mission to solve, and let's hope it all adds up. But those, there's not that commonality of things we're trying to achieve together frequently unless there's a crisis. That you agree with that or disagree with that?
No, I agree with that. And I think that that's what top teams are there for. They are about driving an outcome for your key stakeholder. Now, whether that key stakeholder is the shareholder, whether that is a founder, but somebody's a key stakeholder that top team. If they don't have that purpose of coming together, then why do you exist? You would go back to self-managed teams. So sitting on the executive team, there is something that you need to get alignment around and drive towards. Otherwise, I would say that you've got expensive people not doing a lot of, not doing good work.
All right, so let's go to this. So we talked about the personality of the CEO.
Yep.
We talked about the purpose of the team coming together, the work together. Let's talk about politics, your third P.
Yeah, politics is really the quiet currency of a top team. And politics can be really subtle at times. And again, if you're a new person at the top table, it's really incumbent upon you to try and understand, that political dynamic around the table. Sometimes it can be a tone shift, Wanda. It can be a careful phrase, it can be a sidelong glance or an eye roll. But then sometimes it can be really loud. There's alliances that are in the room, the power dynamics are there. The infamous line is let's go and take this offline. You think, well, what the hell is underneath all of that? I think what's really important for people as they navigate their way around that top table is that what's important is politics isn't automatically toxic. I think we associate with politics equals bad. It's not necessarily, and I think the more senior you get in an organisation and the higher the executive teams, the more you have to play the game. And if you can understand the political dynamic that exists at that table, the better off that you are. And that's where I see a lot of people fail, is that they don't understand the politics. Politics to me, if I look at through a glass as half full, is about people protecting what matters to them. They've got a view and they want to protect it. But I think when it does become toxic and it's when it's unmanaged or unspoken, excuse me, and that's when it can become corrosive. I think it slows down decision-making in an organisation. There's misaligned priorities, and we've just spoken about how important that is. And there's kind of this really weird dance that people can do in a meeting where, they perform the unity dance when they're in the room, but then they negotiate their survival the moment that they leave. I think, healthy politics makes, you should be able to discuss it. And I do a lot of work with dysfunctional teams. And the biggest thing is navigating the politics and the power, which we'll talk about in a minute. But it's what are the politics and how do you create an environment that's trusting so that you can bear the tensions, you can understand what's going on in a safe environment. So key takeaway, politics exists, it's common in every team. You just need to know how to manage it so that it's healthy and it doesn't create dysfunction.
So 2 comments on this one. One is an awful lot of people that I coach will say, I don't want to be on the top team because I don't want to deal with the politics. I think that is a little bit of a naive view because I think everybody deals with politics at every level in the organization. And for me, politics is nothing other than I'm trying to influence people to do what I want to done. Whether it's for my self-interest or for the interest of the company, it's still I'm trying to influence. That's fundamentally what it is. And I will use what tools are available to me to have influence with people. So I watch politics play on the relationships. That's one thing I hear from people is I don't want to play the politics. Second thing I wanted to say is when I watch someone not succeed at that, they take a big level, they're not quite prepared for it. It's the politics that unseats them. And one example I'm thinking about in particular where somebody takes a 2-step move, doesn't have good friendships among the top team because they changed location at the same time. And the net result is someone on that top team has decided that they're not competent or not as good as that person was. And they're a key influencer. And it certainly did not play well in a very quick period of time. But it was a peer that you should be collaborating with and just hadn't built a relationship with. So talk to me about how you read these politics, because you said it's the currency. Sometimes it's subtle, sometimes it's loud. Where do you get started thinking about it?
So I think with politics or even navigating this whole map of personality and power and politics and purpose is you really have to build strong relationships with the folks that are on your team, right? You really need to understand that the power that exists in the relationships that are around that table are the things that are going to make you successful. I mean, I think we should talk about sort of others, but when you're at the top table, you have to manage relationships that are up, across, down and out is the way that I kind of frame it up. But from a peer perspective, you really need to build that relationship so that you understand who they are as people at first, right? Peer relationships are make or break. You have to know your colleagues as people, not just job titles, right? Understand what they care about, understand what success looks like for them, get to know them as a human first. If they've got behaviours that you don't agree with or you don't understand, try and find out what's driving that underneath it. Spend some time doing it. Try and work out who you can trust and test that in a safe environment, because you're going to need some alliances. And I don't mean from a negative point of view, but if you're trying to get a point across, you're trying to get somebody else support on side, look to your peers. They're going to be the strongest base that can support you. So you need to have somebody who can sit behind you. The top team isn't a collection of star players. It's really an independent ecosystem. And what you've got to do is you've got to know who in that ecosystem at what time you can draw on to help you be successful. And the most of that work for me, Wanda, or certainly in the experience that I've had, happens outside the room. Okay, you need to spend the time, those compromises, the influence that you want to have, the alignment, that happens outside the room. So it's about breaking bread with somebody. It's about understanding who they are. It's about understanding what is making them tick. And seeing how, and even sometimes you've got to trade off some of that stuff so you can build an alliance. Sometimes there's a trade-off on what you want to support somebody else so that you build that trust within the relationship. But if you're not building those peer relationships intentionally, then you're playing with kind of half the board missing.
Yeah, so if I think about the one case I talked about where it was the person just derailed in this particular career position, had that individual realized, wait, I need to be talking more frequently to the head of this function and the head of this function and the head of this business, because those are the three biggest impact on the work I'm trying to do. And had they gone and said, here's what I'm thinking, here's what I'm going to say in the next meeting, they would have gotten some fabulous advice at the very beginning about what would work, what wouldn't work, what people wanted to hear, didn't want to hear, and would have avoided months of kind of floundering and not getting anywhere. And I almost say naive in walking into that room without understanding the need to have the peer relationships, at least to the point where you know where everybody stands on any issue that you're presenting.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things I often say to people, who are thinking about stepping up is what got you here is not going to keep you here. And so what got you here is previously is your performance, is the delivery, is your operational expertise, is your strategic thought. That is table stakes when you get to the executive table. Okay, you're expected to have that. That got you here, but it's not going to keep you here. The two biggest things that you need to focus on are relationships and communication. And that's the difference it's going to be with your success, because again, it helps you navigate the 4 Ps of the map that sits around that table.
I love that. Performance is table stakes.
Yeah,
because if you can't perform, you're not even in the consideration set. That's a given.
Yeah, you'll get there, but you will fail. To your point about, your person who's got there, her performance and her delivery and her operational expertise, they've seen potential, promote her to the top table. But unless you can build those relationships and the alliances and the trust with the people that you need to do, and you've got trusted confidence and you know who's got your back and you know whose back you've got, that's where it's going to fall down.
Right. Yeah, I think I watched too many people stepping up into this, believing that they need to prove that they're good enough to be at the table. Yeah. So they'll double down on how the time they spend with their own teams. They'll double down on the performance. They'll double down on, let me show you how good of a job I'm doing in my performance area. Let me report to all of you the details of all the great things that I have done at this particular level. And that's given. If you're not doing that, you're out. We're done.
Yep, 100%. Exactly.
Yeah, it's a very interesting. All right. So when you've joined a top team, Gina, what have you done to start building those relationships? You said breaking bread, but kind of what's your go-to for building those relationships?
It's prioritizing the critical over the urgent, Wanda. And when I say that is that we are always very busy when you get into a new job, because you think, you've got a whole heap of things you've got to learn. The new role might be a new organization, could be a new industry, et cetera, et cetera. And then what we fail to do is we fail to invest time in building those relationships, as I said. So, once you get to that level, the game actually changes. And so for me, it's about, and I think I mentioned it before, is I look up, I look across, I look down, and I look out. And so for me, it starts with my boss, right? And I said CEO sets the tone for it. You're talking about senior, like CEO or senior level. And I would spend an inordinate amount of time trying to understand the CEO, almost like doing a behavioural study on them, right? What makes them tick? What are their triggers, right? I've got a great saying that what interests my boss should fascinate me, right? And so trying to unpack who they are as a human and what are the triggers that might trigger them in a positive or negative way, and then reframing my leadership style around that. And I don't mean become a sycophant, because that's not helpful, because you're not authentic in the role. But it's things like, and a really, really silly example, how do they like to communicate? I had a CEO once that, who I learned to realize hated email, but I would, because I think logically, but I think when I write things out, and it was all logic, and I spent hours writing up all these really thorough emails and making sure every dot point was there. All he wanted was a 5-minute update. And so I would wonder why I was spending all this time writing emails, and then all my peers would have 3-minute phone calls and they get what they want. I'm like, what is going on? But it wasn't until I realised and spent time with him understanding, what the pressures that he were under and what he was like as a human. Sometimes it's not the message, it's the medium, how you actually interact with somebody. Another example, and I hate golf, so I'm going to put my biases out there, but, I have walked golf courses with CEOs lugging the bag so I can get to know them as a human. So whatever works for you, I mean, that may not be right in different contexts and stuff, but I think you understand what makes them tick, understand what their triggers are, and then try and work to the way in which they work. Because yes, you're busy and you're big and you've got an executive job. The CEO is a really lonely place, right? And so, that's even amplified even more. So if you can make your boss's job easy, it's going to make your jobs easy. So that's kind of one, that's the up. And then I think the up, if you will, is really the board. As a CHRO, the relationship with the board is really critical. If you're a senior leader, the relationship with the board, let's not forget that the board, and particularly the chair, is your boss's boss. Okay, so if you think what interests your boss should fascinate you, think about the chair, because there's a trigger there. And so for me, really trying to understand the dynamic between the CEO and his relationship or her relationship with the board, and particularly the chair, because that is going to impact on the CEO, and that's going to impact on you, and it's going to impact on the leadership team. So again, if there is a couple of people within the board that you can build an alliance with or get to know more personally, I found that helped me. 2 reasons. One, helped me understand how the boss thought, but also then when I was going into conversations with the board, I had a couple of people that I could line up. And then there was support, or at least I felt I had that support in the room, which then kind of gave me a sense of confidence and sort of, you could let your shoulders down a little bit. We've talked about peers, right? I do think that building out that peers. And then the other thing for me, and I'll put a bit of a plug in here for, the work we do as coaches, Wanda, I think having somebody outside the organisation who is there as your safe space is absolutely critical. Somebody who can listen to you without judgment, all of your fears, all of your concerns. And this is what I mean about building a relationship outside the organisation. Somebody who's in your corner 100%, that can hold the mirror to you, but at the same time is there. So, get your relationships up, across, down and out is something I prioritised, and it takes time and it's painful, but it's the best investment, and I think it has the greatest payoff.
That's an interesting comment, because I think that's the last thing people think about. They often think at this level that I'm going to have an external person that I can go to that's a safe space. Only when everything else has failed or everything else is settled, then I'll pay attention to it. And they don't recognize the power of just a place to talk. And that, yes, of course, those of us who do coaching do a great job. Go Gina, go Wanda, of course. But there are plenty of other people who can do this as well, if that isn't your favorite kind of spot. A mentor, a former boss, or whatever. There are lots of choices, but having that space. I thought when you said communicate out, you were going to say customers and external, because I'm finding that companies, my clients now, are pushing people to have stronger external relationships. Yes, of course, customers, but you would expect that comes up through the job, doing the job, and through the years in the company. But increasingly external relationships in industry groups, in competitors, in kind of give me a sense of what's happening in the world based on your external relationships. Now, how do you see that?
Yeah, no, and I think that is really important. The world is moving so quickly and it is so complex, and that as a leader, you have to be able to take the big decisions and be able to make the right decisions. And the only way that you can get that is the context in which you're operating, right? And so being out there kind of in the field, and that in the field will differ depending on what role. So in the field for me, from a CHRO perspective, is out there with shareholders, understanding, their views on remuneration and the operating context. If you're a sales director or a business leader, it could be out there talking to your customers. So I think as an executive at the senior leadership table, if you don't have that outside-in view, you are missing one complete view of what will feed into the key decision-making that you have to have. And again, it takes time. And then the other thing I want to add to that, which comes back to kind of the success of an individual stepping up, is building a peer network outside of the organisation, because they will give you a different view, because you are going to need them over time. But they're also a way to test some of your thinking, particularly at the level that you're operating at, and just bolsters that outside-in view. So, yeah, 100% agree.
Okay. All right. So fantastic. All right. So we have talked about recognizing the personality of the CEO. More to it than that. What's their triggers? What's their main interest? What is it that interests them, should fascinate you? You've said very clearly, what are they trying to achieve? What's their legacy going to look like? So all of those pieces of the CEO. We've talked about understanding the purpose. What's this team here to do? And therefore, what's my role in helping this team do that? We've talked about the politics, which really comes down to the relationships. So building those relationships, both with your boss, with the board, with your peers, and then in the broader context outside. And notice none of that has anything to do with how well your team is functioning, just for the record. All right, that brings us to your last P, which is power. How do you think about power?
So for me, if we think that politics is the currency of the team, I think power is the map. And as much as it pains me to say this, Wanda, as a CHRO, org charts are basically fiction. Okay, yep, that'll show you who reports to who. But power maps are really the reality. And every executive team I've worked on has an official hierarchy. Okay, yes, there is the boss, so he comes with implied, so the CEO, yes. But then there is, who are those around the table who hold the actual power? And how do you as an executive navigate that power? So, the person with the biggest title, the most important title, may not actually have the invested power. It's who do people listen to? Who do people go to for advice? I mean, sometimes the gravity and the gravitas sits with the COO or the CFO or, excuse me, maybe even the quiet operator who just sort of sits there and takes it all and listens, but they know how to play the game. Again, my personal experience as a CHRO, I've often held a lot of the power that's sat in the room, and that's been underestimated, which is both an advantage and a disadvantage. I had the ear of the CEO. I could filter messages up. I could filter messages down. As far as the CEO is concerned, I had a dual reporting responsibility. I reported into the chair. I had his or her ear. Now, people say, oh, HR is a function. Well, don't underestimate. Talent reviews. I had the power about whether you got a good. Now, I never wielded that power in a bad way. I'm using it to illustrate the point here. Is that if you miss the nuances of who owns the power in what sort of situation, then that's one of a failure point for you as an executive sitting up on that team. So it's not just positional power. It can be emotional power. It can be relational power. It can be historical power, somebody who's been in the business a long time and knows what's happened. If you can go to them, they might have a sway because they know what's happened in the past and maybe where some of the skeletons are hidden. And how can that help you, right? So I think until you actually understand where the power sits, you'll really never fully understand how that team operates.
Right. Well, and sometimes, in my experience, the power sits outside that room.
Yeah.
So the person who's most likely to influence one of the key players who holds a lot of relational power and historical power, or whatever other one you want to call, is influenced by somebody who's more junior in the organization. And kind of knowing who's driving that, I think, is really important, because that tells you kind of who you need to speak to and who you have a relationship on, what perspective they're coming with and what information they've got. I mean, there's just so much information, and knowing who do people go to.
And how they get that power. I mean, I had one senior leader who would spend a lot of time in canteens. The reason that she spent that time in the canteen was she was listening to the heartbeat of the organisation. And unless you knew that heartbeat of the organisation, you were behind the eight ball when you got into leadership team meetings. So, I 100% agree with that.
Yeah. I have one CEO who, not before being CEO, spends a huge chunk of time talking to people at multiple levels through the organization. And he just picks up random people throughout the organization that he likes and then meets with them because he thinks they have an interesting point of view and follows up with them once a month, once every 2 months, 30 minutes here, 15 minutes there. And he says, because that gives him a sense of what's actually going on, where the problems really are, because he can't get it. At the top, it's too filtered often before when information comes into you.
Yeah, and if you don't do that and if you're not doing that as a leader who's on that executive table when your leader is doing it, you're flying blind. You've got half the information because they're going to be talking about things that you're not going to believe in, which is a really bad position because your boss believes in it. And secondly, you don't know what's going on in the organisation. So, if that's something that they do, you need to mirror it. And you should be doing it in practice anyway.
Well, you remember, Gina, one event that we did together recently this summer, and one of the senior leaders on the top team says, you have to recognize that 50% of what is coming to you is probably inaccurate. And that it's one part of the story. So you've got to look for the 50% and then the other 50%. It's that same, you got to have that information throughout the organization. Okay. Do you have any advice on how to understand the power dynamics? Because that feels like that's a long journey. And if I've just joined an organization, where do you begin?
Yeah, that's a really interesting one. I'll just reiterate that you have to invest time in it, Wanda, because, your urgent in the day is going to override the critical, and this is absolutely critical. And I think you just spoke to a really good example is you go and do kind of what I would call vox pops in the organisation. If you've got a theory on something, you go and test it with a few people and see what sort of flavour is coming back. Is there any themes that are there? So it might be with your own team. What are they hearing? Because often they will hear stuff that is unfiltered, and if you've got trust within your team, you'll hear some of that information come forward. It could be, and I've done this a couple of times, and it's hard work, but go and find somebody that you don't have a great relationship and trying to understand their position, right? People love to tell their own story, right? You ask something about somebody and you'll find that they're a lot more giving, but they'll give you a different perspective that perhaps you haven't thought of. And again, that's, it's one of those coaching tools that I think we use is go and find somebody who you don't get on with and ask them, some really, really helpful questions. So I think it is getting out there. It's boots on the ground. It's investing time to try and understand different perspectives and what's coming up in the organisation. And then, as I said, the peer networks externally.
One of the best pieces of advice I've heard given, and I now pass it on, of course, is when you're joining an organization for new, particularly at this top level, get your boss to give you a list of the 30, 40, 50 people you need to get to know. And frequently that list will move past the obvious suspects in the very top and down to those that have more power. And often the boss knows they have more power. The information, the relationships, the history, the whole bunch of different things. So a tip there. Okay. You dropped in this whole discussion about politics and the very beginning about it's the relationships and it's the communication. So let's talk a little bit about communication. How do you think about communicating within this team? And I see people who go routinely to present to the top team and they just blow it badly. So help me understand how you communicate in that group, and then how, if I'm coming in as an outsider, how I need to be thinking about communicating.
Yeah, I've seen so many brilliant executives that come in and think that they've got to give lots of detail to prove that they're the smartest person in the room and to show what they're talking about. They kind of come in armed with their 12-point plan and 3 scenarios and an appendix in their head. And one of 2 things happens. The first thing that happens is you'll take people down a rabbit hole and go to a place that you don't want to go. And so there is so much risk attached to that sort of strategy. Suddenly you're off squirreling down doing something else and you've lost your audience. And then the other thing is you completely lose them to begin with, right? They're just like, this is not relevant to me. There's way too much detail. For me, I think at the top table, detail doesn't signal expertise. Judgment does. So I think you've got to go in. There's a number of things that I think about. Is start with the headline, not the history, right? So lead with the answer. What is the risk that you want to talk about? What's the decision that you need from the team? And then sort of only offer detail if need be. These executives are going to be short on time, usually short on patience. So it's start with the headline, not the history. The second one is frame the issue. Don't drown people in it. I think a clear, confident sentence like, here is the decision that we need to make today. Here are the two options that we've got. What would you like to know about them? And then let them ask you the questions that they need answers on rather than you. So it's like pulling information rather than pushing out. So frame the issue and ask the question. The other thing that I see happens with executives, particularly new executives that step up from operational teams into executive teams, is that they speak in processes and not outcomes. Okay? As an executive, what we want to do is, to your point, we want to know, what does this mean for our customer? What does this mean for cost? What does this mean in, trade-offs that we have to make? Whereas a lot of new executives get up and talk about the process to get there. It's not, when you're at that executive team, it's outcomes, not process that's important. So start with the headline, frame the issue, speak in outcomes. And then the final two things is read the room. All right, this is one of the biggest derailers I have seen happen is somebody comes in and they've got their 45-page PowerPoint and they start from dot point one on page one and, everybody's just a blithering mess by page 3. So really read the room. It's not about you as an individual. It's about the outcome you're looking for. And so just be quite judgmental and pivot in the moment if you need to. And then finally, leave time for questions because, again, you might know it, others may not.
Right. The reading the room, I find when you're interacting with that top team, you are held hostage by what happened before you walk in the room.
Okay.
And sometimes that can be a really good thing and they're in a great mood. Sometimes they're exhausted because it's the 15th presentation of the day. Sometimes it's a really bad thing because it was a very difficult conversation and you are held hostage to whatever happened before you. That's a hard one because you don't know it until you walk in the room.
No. That's right. And the skill is to be able to, I had a great conversation with a client recently who that exact thing happened. What had happened in the room beforehand was that there was a bit of a board spat. It was a late meeting. She was last on. There was a board spat. There was already tension in the room. She walked in with a 10-page PowerPoint, which she had slimmed down from 30. So she took coaching, but still it was 10. And she, the technology didn't work. They didn't have the right deck in front of it. It was a complete disaster. But she didn't read the room. Instead of sort of say, do we need to take a break here? Do we need to take 5? Do we need to reset? I can feel that there's something going on. She just went plowed in, right? Because that's what she thought her position was. So had she read the room, she would have taken a step back or she would have pivoted to the CEO and asked, how would he like this meeting now to continue, and sort of taking a bit of a guide.
It's, you feel like this time, I'm so prepared for it. This time is so precious. It's already probably late. And so the rush to jump in is there. And, it doesn't work if you don't have their attention. So they're still human beings at the end of the day. So now let's talk to one of your favorite topics, which has to do with confidence. So you join this top team.
Yeah.
I think, especially I think anywhere, there's going to be a little bit of an imposter syndrome. Am I good enough to be here? Do I have the confidence to be here? How do you help people think about their confidence game at this stage?
Well, I think confidence and imposter syndrome go hand in hand. And so for a full confession here, Wanda, we're being open and authentic with our listeners. I've had imposter syndrome all my life. I still do, right? When you were reading out my bio at the start, I'm thinking, who is this woman and why is she using my name? Right? And I think the thing to remember is that confidence is not a personality trait. It's actually a skill you have to build and you've got to work on, right? Now, there are some people who have this, that comes to them this more naturally, and others that don't, and then things happen, etc. But I think it's something that you have to build. And for me, there's 4 things that I try and use myself, and there's 4 things that I coach on. And I think the first one, and it really, really helped me when I figured it out, was honestly, the majority of people, both male and female, have imposter syndrome. So you are not unique. Okay, so if you just think it's you, it's not. Even the most successful people, and in fact, some of the more successful they are, the greater the imposter syndrome. So I think if you can name it, right? You go, okay, this is the gremlin that's on my shoulder, that's talking in my ear, that's telling me that I'm not good enough. If you just name that in and of itself, you go, okay, shush. Shush. Okay? Just shut it down. The second thing is that for me, facts beat feelings. So for this podcast, I'll make it personal. I went on, I listened to a couple of your podcasts, which were amazing. And then you got, where my head was going, so, oh my gosh, Wanda's got these amazing people who come on this podcast and they've written books and they're doctors and they're professors and they're da-da-da-da-da-da. And I'm like, whoa. And for me, it's just like, okay, let's go back and collect the evidence about you. Stop comparing yourself to others. How are you in this moment, what you have to do? And so it's about talking to yourself about, what are the promotions that you've earned? I was a girl from, East Keeler who I made good. So, but what are the promotions that I'd earned over time? What are the tough situations that I'd navigated? What are some of the things I'd done and spoken about in the past? So facts and, feelings are not facts, right? And facts will beat feelings. So catch it in the moment and then talk yourself through the evidence of actually what you've done in the past. The third one is treat yourself like a friend. If you had a friend that came and said to you, I feel like a fraud, I'm not good enough, you're going to turn around and say to them, yeah, you're right, you should go home. I'm not going to do that, right? I mean, you're going to be caring to that friend, you're going to be encouraging, you would remind them of all the facts. So for me, it's about treat yourself with some kindness, offer yourself some compassion in all of that. And then finally, it's about you do belong in the room. You think about any group, there is always going to be a normal distribution of people that sit in that group. Sure, there's going to be some people that are much more experienced and perhaps more intellectually brighter than what you are. Fantastic. Take the opportunity to learn from them. The other end of the scale, there's going to be people who perhaps are not as intellectually blessed as what you are, not as experienced. Fantastic. Take the opportunity to mentor them. You belong in the room. Okay. And if you think about that you're in a spectrum of people, stop comparing yourself and just focus on you. And so for me, it's just not a thought. It's not a truth. It's who, you can do this, you belong there. And then something, and then that should bring down, and it just builds a bit more confidence.
And I think, as we've said all along too, if you have some friends in the room, or you at least know where people stand on what you're about to say or propose, that gives you, some smiling faces there. And that always is that boost that makes it a little bit easier to keep going. I find that it's exactly what you said, that you can boost confidence by recognizing what you are bringing to the table. I don't have to bring everything, but I have something to bring. And that's that sense of what's the facts about me. I love the way you said that. That was great. That's really good. All right, Gina, what do we miss? What do people need to know that we haven't talked about in terms of this top team and careers?
I think we pretty much covered everything. I mean, we've covered the confidence. I guess my parting thought is enjoy the journey. These top teams, they can be tough. As they started out, they are a real paradox. But you only get one shot in life. So, get up and think about what can you achieve today? Who can you influence today? What can I learn today? Who can I interact with? And enjoy part of the journey. You don't want to sit back and go, oh my gosh, that was just really, really hard work and I didn't enjoy it. And again, it's just enjoy the journey. It's there to be had. Right.
That also gives a sense of lightness to all the dynamics that are going on. Because as you said, sometimes it's rather funny when you pull back from it and stop being so engaged in the details.
Yeah.
Well, I love your framework at the top. I think this is a great way for people to think about the top team. So to think about the personality of the CEO and all that goes in with that. To think about the purpose. What's that team there to do? What are we trying to do? And, are we in crisis or not in crisis? What's our reason for working together? Then to think about the politics. Who's influencing whom where? What are those subtle dynamics? Where's the history between people? And then to think about the bases of power within the organization. The bases of power with people in the room and the bases of power in the organization as a whole. And then to recognize that you are not alone, number one. Find those relationships, invest in my favorite phrase of the day is invest your time in the critical, not the urgent. Get out of the fires, focus on the things that are long-term investments. Fabulous. Gina, what a pleasure having you. Thank you for joining us. Gina Jardine. If somebody wanted to find you, Gina, where's the best place to reach out to you?
So my consulting company is Jardine Oats, so www.jardineoats with an .com, or on my email, which is gina.jardine@jardineoats.com.
Fabulous. All right. It's wonderful. Thank you for joining us, and see you soon, I hope. And for everyone else, please join us next week for another episode in Getting Out of Your Comfort Zone.
Thank you for joining us today. Tune in for another edition next week with Dr. Wanda Wallace on the Voice America Business Channel. Reach outside your comfort zone this week.